land that has been wrested from an angry sea by a race that has for centuries struggled to keep under control that devouring and all-powerful element, water. It is a country that has been created by its own inhabitants out of mud, for almost half of the land is below the level of the sea. Volendam, a small fishing village on the shores of the Zuider Zee, is the spot chosen for most of the pictorial scenes, known the world over as representative of Holland. Red flannel underwear is the fisherman's only concession to the cold when he sails his boats into the icy waters of the North Sea. The Dutch are credited with being the first to establish Monday as wash day, and it has since been adopted by most of the civilized world. On Sunday, when the fishing fleet is in, Volendam takes on a festive air. The wooden shoes of the weekdays are discarded, and little feet suffer in tiny patent leather shoes. In matters of dress, the children are exact replicas of their parents. A well-groomed young lady in this quaint little village is expected to wear at least 7 petticoats, and underneath her white lace cap, a black skull cap, for it is considered indecent, even for a child, to allow her head to be exposed in public. The people of Volendam dress the same winter and summer, a tiny scarf being the only addition to the feminine wardrobe during the long, cold winter months. Not only in dress, but in manners and customs, the little Volendam boy is a miniature of his father, and he naturally aspires to be a fisherman, like his father and the fathers of all his playmates. The fishermen of Volendam have inspired many a well-known painting and have helped to spread the fame of their village throughout the world. Nearly every Dutch village has its town crier who announces the arrival of strangers, the latest birth or death, and also establishes the ownership of lost and found articles. Or perhaps, as he did today, he advises the people to clean their houses and weed their gardens in anticipation of a coming holiday. The Dutch have started upon the great work of draining the Zuider Zee, and when this task is accomplished, it will add 1/15 to the total of Holland's 12,000 square miles. In place of these little ships with their beautiful colored sails, will be pastures and orchards and rolling grassy plains. The Zuider Zee is the youngest ocean on earth. History records its birth by the inundations of the Middle Ages, and history will record its death when it is reconquered. Amsterdam, the capital and largest city in the Netherlands, owes its growth and importance chiefly to its position as the center of the world's diamond trade, as well as its connection with the development of the famous East India Company. There are about 2,000 miles of navigable canals in the Netherlands, and every house is a port where one may take boat for any part of the world. Spring is the season of the year when Holland dons her most colorful raiment, for it is then that the cultivation of bulbs is carried on extensively, and miles upon miles of tulips and hyacinths are to be found in their most perfect environment.
When the springtime comes to Holland, when the fragrant tulips grow, it is like a spot from heaven, just transported here below. And in fancy I can see her in that garden by the sea, where we stroll among the lilies, where she's waiting now for me. It's tulip time in Holland, tulips I know are lonely, the sweetest lips in Holland are blooming for me only. I'd give the world if I could stay back there beside her by the Zuider Zee. It's tulip time in Holland, tulips are calling me.
Tulips were first introduced into Holland from the Far East about the middle of the 16th century, and the curious demand for them eventually led to one of the most extraordinary speculative manias the world has ever known. Much of the ordinary trade of the country was given up, and the usual occupations of the citizens were neglected, so that more time and money could be given to this new and quick method of becoming rich. Fabulous prices were paid for rare species. A prize of 100,000 florins was offered for a black tulip, a feat that was considered impossible at the time. Anyone who has read Alexander Dumas' story of the black tulip will know with what difficulty that prize was won. Today in Holland there are still a few rare specimens of this same black flower, and a halo of romance still lingers around it. Holland has ideal climatic and soil conditions for the production of bulbs. And when one adds to this the knowledge that has resulted from years of patient enterprise and research, one understands why it is that the Dutch have attained their enviable reputation as bulb growers. 5 years are required for the full development of the bulb. Bulbous plants have gradually developed the habit of making growth one season and storing food in an underground storehouse or bulb until the next. For this reason, the beautiful blossoms must be removed as soon as they reach maturity, in order that the strength of the bulb is not impaired, and that it may bloom again in all perfection. In each field there is a pathetic mound of dead flowers, for it seems there is no way to profitably utilize these discarded blossoms. Perhaps there is no chapter in the story of mankind which has endowed a country with more color and romance than has that of the tulip industry of Holland. For not only has this glamorous occupation converted it into a dreamland of floral rainbows, it has also contributed to Holland's commercial importance among the nations of the world, so that today there is hardly a cultivated tulip growing in the gardens of the Western Hemisphere that did not have its distant origin in one of the tulip fields of Holland. Truly, a no more poetic tribute could be given to any country than the fact that it developed and gave to the Western world one of its most colorful flowers, the tulip. And it is with this thought that we say farewell to Holland in tulip time.
Tulips are calling me.
At the entrance to Zion National Park in the state of Utah, the stars and stripes unfurled in an atmosphere of peace and grandeur remind us that we are in the land of Uncle Sam, where Mother Nature has built her largest and most colorful canyons. In 1919, Zion was made a national park, and today it is regarded as one of the most precious scenic possessions of the United States government. This awe-inspiring pageant of scenery inspires reflection and causes time and space to fade in the minds of mortals. For here we behold a colorful history, engraved in stone, every strata being the indelible record of 1,000,000 years or more in the evolution of the earth. The combined forces of time, water, and wind have molded Zion Canyon.
Oh, come along, boys, and listen to my tale. Tell you all my troubles on the old Children Trail. Come a tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay, yippee-yay. Come a tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay. Oh, I started up the trail October 23rd. I started up the trail with the two you heard. Come a tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay, yippee-yay. Come a tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay. Oh, I went to the boss for to draw my roll. He had me figured out $9 in the hole. Come a tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay, yippee-yay. Come a tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay.
According to geologists, the colored cliffs were created when all this land lay beneath the sea. In the course of a great upheaval, the earth slipped, causing colossal cracks, which became exposed to the erosive forces of water and wind, until rushing torrents widened the cracks and finally caused the prodigious canyon walls, which we now behold. One of the most interesting examples of erosion is the Great Arch of Zion, forerunner of a natural bridge that may be completed in a few thousand years or more, as time goes with Mother Nature, the most patient of builders. Although this arch looks like a tiny niche, it is over 700 feet long and is cut about 90 feet into the cliff. But massive construction in Zion Canyon is no longer the monopoly of nature, for man has begun to compete with her, and in this respect he points with pride to the famous Mount Carmel Highway and Tunnel, regarded as one of the most spectacular engineering feats in America. This tunnel is cut for over a mile through solid rock, and opening from it are a series of high windows, framing some of the grandest views in all of Zion. The first white men to settle in Utah were Mormons, and it was they who christened this glorious canyon with the name of Zion. A story is told that Brigham Young, the great Mormon leader, disputed the title and said, "It is not Zion," whereupon his followers called it not Zion until recent times.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word. Contrasting strangely with the huge sandstone walls are the modest little Zion lilies, which grow in wild profusion along the highway. The Indians extracted juices from these flowers for medicinal purposes. Situated in the heart of Zion is a fertile basin or valley where green lawns and shady trees contrast beautifully with the warmer tones of the canyon walls. It is here that Zion Lodge and its adjacent cabins were built to accommodate the ever-increasing number of tourists who visit Zion Canyon every year. An interesting and colorful feature of the lodge are the attractive young ladies in attendance, most of whom are college students and descendants of the Mormons who first inhabited the state of Utah. In addition to their domestic duties, they greet all visitors with a song of welcome, which is most appropriate in this song-inspiring region of the Rocky Mountains.
When it's springtime in the Rockies, I am coming back to you. Little sweetheart of the mountains, with your bonny eyes of blue. Once again I say I love you, while the birds sing all the same. When it's springtime in the Rockies far away.
We have traveled around the world many times and have visited most places of unusual interest, but never before have we seen anything to compare with this gloriously ideal region, where the simple and more wholesome diversions of life may be enjoyed in harmony with nature at its grandest. But now the time has come for us to leave this kingdom of ideal diversion. And the song of farewell that is sung to us as we depart carries a sentiment that will always remain in our memories of Zion Canyon.
Farewell, farewell, from back again. We're glad to have you see our matchless Zion. Take one long look, the memory will remain till you come back again.
And as we take our last long look at Zion Canyon, Magnificently enshrined in the soft shades of purple that come and go with the twilight hour, we have a better understanding of what John Greenleaf Whittier, the American poet, meant when he wrote these inspiring words. Touched by a light that hath no name, a glory never sung, aloft on sky and mountain wall, are God's great pictures hung.
Porque cantando se alegra el cielito lindo los corazones.
No metropolis in the history of the world has a more interesting background than Mexico City, capital of the Republic of Mexico, and formerly the heart of a great Indian empire, over which reigned Montezuma, one of the last of the mighty Aztec emperors. It is difficult to believe that over 5 centuries ago, when practically all of the Indians of North America were living as savages, there dwelt here a vast population of well-organized and wisely ruled red men who were versed in the finer amenities of human relationship and familiar with the fundamental principles of art, religion, and science. Mexico City was the goal of Cortez when in 1519 he landed his army on the coast of Mexico and learned of the fabulous wealth that surrounded the throne of Montezuma. Then the great conquest began. The march of Cortez from the coast to Mexico City and the surrender and death of Montezuma is one of the most thrilling chapters in history. But modern Mexico now engages our attention. The National Palace of Arts, in which is also located the National Theater, is regarded as one of the most beautiful modern buildings in all of Mexico. Its construction was begun in 1900 under the presidency of Diaz, and it was only recently completed. The most historic, if not the most interesting section of Mexico City is the Plaza Mayor, into which Cortez and his men marched and demanded the surrender of Montezuma. On the site of the great cathedral at the far end of the square, there once stood an imposing Aztec temple, which was destroyed by Cortez. The foundations for the present structure were laid almost 4 centuries ago. In the 19th century, the church became so wealthy that it owned practically 1/3 of the Mexican Republic. During recent years, however, drastic reform laws have nationalized its property, deprived it of state support, and forbade it any participation in political affairs. The man who inspired the reform laws was Benito Juarez, formerly President of the Republic and one of Mexico's greatest leaders and statesmen, the famous liberator who overthrew the reign of Maximilian. Something of the glamour of old Spain may still be seen in the parks of Mexico City, where prominent citizens ride forth in colorful costumes, not unlike those that were worn in the thrilling days of the conquest. When the Spaniards first appeared in Mexico on horseback, the bravest Indians fled or were prostrated in fright, for they had never seen a horse before. In fact, if it were not for horses, it is doubtful that Cortez could have defeated Montezuma. Bullfighting is still the most popular sport of the Republic, and no visit to Mexico City would be complete without at least seeing a little of the colorful preliminaries that attend a typical bullfight. Many of the more enlightened Mexicans are opposed to bullfighting, and they refuse to patronize it. The great Mexican president, Diaz, was not in favor of the sport, but the people were so attached to it that even at the height of his power, he dared not abolish it. Nevertheless, there is an organized movement for the abolition of bullfighting, As a matter of fact, this cruel sport is forbidden today in several of the towns and districts of Mexico. Away from the bull ring at the floating gardens of Xochimilco, we find a setting that is more in keeping with our ideas of diversion. For here is something of the romantic side of old Mexico, which has endeared it to the world's lovers of music and romance. This Mexican Venice forms a picturesque setting for a people who are naturally inclined to regard the more colorful and romantic diversions of life as essential to their happiness. And it is in this respect that we join with them and also say, Viva Mexico! Overlooking the city of Mexico is the castle of Chapultepec, where most of the Mexican rulers have dwelt since the reign of the unfortunate emperor, Maximilian, who was placed upon the throne of Mexico in 1864 by the soldiers of France, and for 3 years conducted the functions of royalty here in superficial mimicry of the French court. Inside the castle may be seen the magnificent stained glass windows, which were imported from France by Maximilian for his beautiful young empress, Carlotta. As we gaze upon these world-famous windows, we recall the pathetic story of how Carlotta, in an effort to keep her husband on the throne of Mexico, went to France to plead with Napoleon III, who had threatened to withdraw his soldiers, but her pleading was in vain. The French troops evacuated Mexico, and after Maximilian was executed, Carlotta lost her reason and spent the remaining years of her life in a state of mental derangement. But at Chapultepec Castle today, these stained glass windows perpetuate her memory. On the picturesque terrace of Chapultepec Castle, we are entertained by the Típica Orchestra of the Mexico City Police Department, rendering the ever-popular Jarabe. Is the most popular dance of Mexico, typifying, as it were, the spirit of a people who dwell in a land of color, music, and romance. And it is with this thought that we reluctantly say farewell to historic Mexico City. Great expanse of the Pacific Ocean lies the romantic city of Honolulu, capital and chief seaport of the Hawaiian Islands. Although it is practically isolated from civilization as far as geographical distances are concerned, the nearest port of any consequence being over 2,000 miles away, It is the pivotal center of the great trade routes of the Pacific and a colorful meeting place for the peoples of the Orient and the Occident. It is also the headquarters of one of the most strategic and important naval stations of the United States Navy. Like most of the world's great cities, this outpost of the Pacific has its famous landmark, the Tower of Aloha, a symbol of welcome and farewell to the thousands of travelers who visit Honolulu every year. Since the beginning of the 20th century, the Hawaiian Islands have been a territory, but not a possession of the United States. Consequently, the influence of the United States has generally asserted itself throughout all of Hawaii, but more particularly in the city of Honolulu, which is rapidly becoming a modern metropolis, comparable with the most up-to-date cities in the world. Modern civilization, however, has not effaced the memory and the glorification of the Polynesian kings, former rulers of Hawaii, the greatest of whom was King Kamehameha, that beloved leader and hero who brought the turbulent islands under one rule in the year of 1795. In commemoration of his memory, this statue has been erected by a grateful people, and the poetical symbol of Hawaii, a lei or wreath of flowers, is ever present upon the arm that is raised in perpetual greeting. The colorful capes worn by the former kings of Hawaii were made of feathers taken from a certain species of bird, and the catching of these birds was usually accomplished by placing a sticky gum substance upon their favorite food trees. Each bird rendered only 2 of its most brilliant feathers. There are only a few of these precious capes in existence. They represent the highest development in Hawaiian art and are priceless beyond any evaluation. Although Mother Nature has been most generous in bestowing her tints and tones upon the islands, the native Hawaiians often resort to artificiality in gratifying their color instincts. The coloring of coral, for example, has become an art in itself, and not a few of the natives depend upon the sale of what they call coral flowers for a livelihood. The real Hawaiian flowers, however, are of more striking beauty, and they are constantly being praised in native poetry and song. In a land that has over 900 species of flowering plants, it is only natural that flowers should play an important part in the lives of the native people, and this probably accounts for the custom of making floral wreaths or leis, which are placed upon the shoulders of visitors as a romantic token of welcome. When Captain Cook discovered Hawaii over 150 years ago, he estimated the native population to be about 400,000. But today, chiefly because of intermarriage, there are not more than 15,000 pure-blooded Hawaiians left upon the earth. The hula of ancient Hawaii, however, continues to be the traditional dance of the people, and it will probably remain as such long after the original Hawaiian race is completely absorbed by other races. Every phase of Polynesian life is represented in the art of dancing, and the whole gamut of human emotions is drawn upon for inspiration. There are hulas of rowing and hunting, hulas of courtship and love, hulas of birth, and hulas of death. As a matter of fact, little or nothing could have been recorded in the history of Hawaii prior to the coming of the white man, if it were not for the ancient records that have been preserved in the art of Hawaiian dancing. Diamond Head, Honolulu's most familiar landmark, gracefully extending itself into the Pacific Ocean, forms an imposing background for Waikiki, a narrow strip of beach which has become world famous through story and song. Nothing in all the world is more beautiful than the coast of Hawaii, where the white-crested waves of the turquoise sea lazily caress the colorful shores, and an atmosphere of pleasure and peace is ever present. Over 1,000 years ago, when European seamen were still hugging their coasts in staunch little ships, afraid lest they fall off the edge of the world, the ancient Hawaiians were crossing thousands of miles of open sea in frail canoes with only the stars, the winds, and the birds to guide them. And at the end of their long and perilous journey, this was the coast that they sighted, and it was somewhere along this colorful shore that they landed. With such inspiration as this, it is no wonder that the last reigning queen of Hawaii should compose one of the sweetest and saddest songs in the annals of music, the true significance of which is generally felt when one sails away from Honolulu with the melody of Aloha Oe lingering in his heart. Picturesquely situated on the Pacific coast of Mexico lies the colorful little seaport of Mazatlan, owing its importance chiefly to the fact that it is a gateway to Mexico and a convenient harbor for ships plying between California, South America, and New York. Aside from its modern status, Mazatlan intrigues our imagination with thoughts of the countless tides that have caressed its shores and the thousands of ships that have come and gone since the first Spanish galleon weighed anchor in its harbor and landed a colorful cargo of buccaneers in quest of adventure and gold. That was many centuries ago, but within a short distance of modern Mazatlan, there is a tiny fishing village that has changed but little since the day that the first white man set foot on the shores of Mexico. Here the native fishermen enjoy a peaceful existence as Mother Nature provides all that they seem to require for their happiness and well-being. The coconut palm, which grows in picturesque profusion in the vicinity of Mazatlan, is the most benevolent tree in the life of man, for it gives beauty, shade, food, and drink without care or attention from him who receives them. As a matter of fact, if it were not for the coconut palm, it is doubtful that human life would be possible among the poorer natives in tropical countries. It is an odd fact that in the first written records of the Spanish explorers who visited Mazatlan, reference is made to the giant turtles that inhabit the streams and the land and provide food for hungry men. We wonder if this old fellow remembers something of the color and romance that the Spanish buccaneers brought to Mazatlan to be perpetuated in the hearts of their descendants, who still include music and dancing among the necessities of life. Following in the path of the Spanish buccaneers, we come to the native village of Toluca, where we are afforded an opportunity of seeing something of the rural life of Mexico on a typical market day. Many of the native people in this marketplace are descended from the former subjects of the great Indian kings who ruled Mexico before the Spanish conquest. Long and trying centuries have passed over them, but apparently the innovations of time have been exceedingly slow in bringing about any fundamental changes in the manners and customs which they inherited from their ancestors. Styles of dress may have changed, commodities may be weighed on modern scales, and modern money may be the medium of exchange. But the heart of the full-blooded Mexican Indian, silently defying the inroads of the white man, still beats in the past and glories in tales of the days when the great King Montezuma guided the destinies of Mexico. Of all the arts that were in vogue when the conquest of Mexico began, none was more general or better developed than that of pottery. And even today, the Mexican Indian plies this trade with all the traditional skill of his ancestors. In fact, the fame of Mexican pottery has created an international market, and not a little of Mexico's annual revenue comes from this source of trade. No garment or article of dress worn in rural Mexico is more important than that which is called the serape, a mere blanket with a hole in the center through which the wearer's head is protruded. Simple to be sure, but it is the Mexican Indian's overcoat by day and his blanket by night. Rural Mexico is noted for the picturesque little towns that dot its landscape, like time-honored hamlets of the old world. And among the most celebrated of these is the quaint little town of Tasco, a miniature of Spain itself. Aside from being a source of inspiration for modern artists, Tasco has a very interesting history, which takes us back to the days of the Spanish grandees, who made tremendous fortunes from silver mines in this district. As an example of their great wealth, it is said that one of them paved the street leading from his home to the church with silver bars for his daughter's wedding. From the proceeds of his silver mines in Tasco, another wealthy miner built this cathedral, which has been standing for over 200 years as a tribute to his memory. Generally speaking, in Tasco, the religion, architecture, color, and romance of old Castile have left their indelible impressions and bestowed upon Mexico a contribution that adds greatly to the picturesqueness of her countryside, as well as to the artistic traditions of her people. Fortunate is the Mexican village that has a plentiful supply of water, for scarcity of water is one of rural Mexico's greatest problems, and this may account for the importance of the pulque industry, which has its source in the desert-growing maguey plant. Normally, the maguey would flower into a stalk from 12 to 20 feet high, but it is purposely stunted in order to make it more productive. A normal plant has been known to give as many as 50 gallons of its liquid over a period of 6 months. If pulque is drunk in its natural state, fresh from the plant, it is regarded as a wholesome beverage, but after it is fermented and allowed to stand, it becomes one of the world's most abominable drinks. The better-class Mexicans regard fermented pulque and its attending evils as a curse to their country. An organized effort is now enforced to curtail, if not to destroy, the pulque industry. The pyramids of Mexico are without question the most noteworthy of all the relics that remain in tribute to the ancient Toltec Indians, who are credited with having built them centuries before the coming of the white man. This one is called the Pyramid of the Moon, and it has yet to be uncovered and explored. But a few hundred yards away may be seen the Pyramid of the Sun, which after having had its topsoil removed, reveals a perfectly preserved pyramid, one of the wonders of the Western world. Unlike the Egyptians, who built their pyramids as tombs for their kings, the Toltecs built them as altars of worship to perpetuate the memory of their gods and to fill the hearts of the people with an awe-inspiring sense of power and permanence. Even today, the pyramids of Mexico are as awe-inspiring as they were in the days when devout Indian worshipers prayed upon their terraces, never dreaming that a time would come when their gods would fall before the onslaught of another race, and their altars of worship would be no more than an epitaph to their memory. And it is with this thought that we say farewell to Mexico. Just off the extreme southwestern coast of Canada lies the picturesque little city of Victoria, chief seaport of Vancouver Island and the capital of British Columbia, the most westerly of Canada's 9 provinces. The history of Vancouver Island goes back to the thrilling days of fur trading, when Russian adventurers crossed the northern Pacific to Alaska and later made their way down the western coast to Vancouver Island, which had already begun to attract fur traders from most of the seafaring nations, including Spain and England, the chief contenders for ownership. Due largely to the diplomacy of the British captain, George Vancouver, war between England and Spain was averted, and the island, which now bears the name of Vancouver, became part of the British Empire. Almost from the beginning of its history, therefore, Vancouver Island has been British, and its chief city, named after the late Queen Victoria of England, is said to be the most English city in the Dominion of Canada. The Empress Hotel, built and furnished in the baronial style of Old England, is the social center of Victoria and one of the finest hotels in North America. The executive headquarters of law and order for all of British Columbia are the Houses of Parliament, forming the most imposing buildings in Victoria. As far as distance is concerned, Main Street in Victoria is thousands of miles from the nearest town in England, but in appearance at least, it is not unlike many a street we have seen in the British Isles, including the typical English bobby, who directs the casual traffic and disdains the modern idea of traffic lights. In the suburbs of Victoria, there are 16 acres of fairyland, better known as Butchard's Gardens, where one may see countless varieties of plant life and splendid examples of old-fashioned gardening, artistically blended with the wildness of nature. We have said that Victoria is regarded as the most British city in the Dominion of Canada, and we are constantly being reminded of this fact, not only through its architecture and landscapes, but also in the manners and customs of its inhabitants, many of whom are the descendants of the pioneer fur traders, including those who came from bonnie Scotland, bringing with them their traditional folk music and dancing to be transplanted upon the virgin soil of their adopted country. Nothing in the great Northwest is more colorful and thrilling to witness than the so-called musical ride of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The total force of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police today does not exceed 1,300 officers and men. Yet in the fulfillment of their duties, they efficiently police thousands of miles of territory, extending northwestward from the boundary line of the United States through the Canadian Rockies to the polar regions. It is said that criminals fear these guardians of the peace more than they fear any other arm of the law in North America, for they know that no matter how far north they may travel or where they may hide in the vastness of the Canadian Rockies, they will sooner or later be captured by the dreaded Mounties, who always get their man. It is doubtful that the development of the great Northwest would have been possible had it not been for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who protected the railroad builders and pioneer settlers from the onslaughts of warring Indians, and later protected the Indians themselves from the illegal exploitation of renegade white men. About 40 miles from Victoria on the mainland of Western Canada lies the city of Vancouver, the largest in British Columbia, with a population of about 350,000 inhabitants. It has one of the finest harbors in the world, forming a natural port of egress for Canada's rapidly developing trade with the Orient, Australia, Latin America, and the islands of the South Seas. It is also the terminus of numerous rail and steamship lines, plying between the United States and Canada. Vancouver is one of the great cities of the Northwest that owes much of its development and prosperity to the lumber industry. About 70 years ago, shortly after the establishment of Vancouver, a great fire swept the whole town to destruction, and out of the ashes there arose a new city built of brick and stone, financed principally by the proceeds of lumber sold to the outside market. By a strange twist of fate, therefore, Vancouver, the great lumber port of the Northwest, has fewer wooden buildings than any other city of its size in the Dominion of Canada. The shopping districts are comparable to those of the world's metropolitan cities, and there is to be found here, among commodities of local manufacture, the choice merchandise of the British Isles. In the residential sections of the city, we find a substantial array of colorful homes, designed and laid out in a style that is typical of Vancouver. Uniquely situated in the center of Vancouver is Stanley Park, with a total area of 1,000 acres encircled by a 7-mile motor drive, which affords one the opportunity of viewing an ever-changing panorama of forest and garden scenes. On July 26, 1923, the late Warren G. Harding addressed a tremendous gathering in Stanley Park, and insofar as he was the first president of the United States to visit Canada, a monument has been erected on the spot where he spoke, and it commemorates the spirit of friendship and goodwill that exists between Canada and the United States, two great neighbors who have learned how to live in peace with each other. And it is with this thought that we say farewell to Victoria and Vancouver, gateways to Canada. Cherry blossom time in Japan is the season of the year when the whole country becomes imbued with a spirit of life and hope that is beyond the comprehension of Occidental minds. For here the cherry tree is regarded as a principle of life, whose snowy wand transforms the earth and gives new powers to the heart, which may be shared by all classes, from the humblest to the most exalted. For the brief lifetime of the blossoms, a period of not more than 2 weeks in any given locality, the nation is practically on holiday, and the cherry bloom is the topic of the hour. To the Japanese, the fragile cherry blossom is a profound lesson in how to live and how to die. It bursts triumphantly into beauty for one short span, and then when its time comes to go, instead of clinging to the branch of life, it gracefully yields to the inevitable and flutters down to join its fellows in the diurnal round of nature. And so it is that the cherry blossom plays an exalted part in the Japanese philosophy of life. The magnificence of the cherry trees' flower-laden boughs and the picturesque flutter of their falling petals inspired an ancient poet to liken them to the soul of Japan, a beautiful illustration of the character of the Japanese people. They worship nature, and it is by such scenes as these that their greatest art is inspired. The cherry blossom season has also inspired a rather unique dance, which is performed by the geisha, or the professional singing and dancing girls of Japan. The faces of the geisha while performing in public are covered with oshiroi, the honorable powder, so that their real features are hardly discernible. Typical Japanese music is so unlike that of the Western Hemisphere that it is difficult for us to understand and appreciate it. But nevertheless, it plays an important part in the cultural development of Japan. It is usually played in a minor key and in half tones. None of it is written, but it has been kept alive for centuries through the inherent powers of human memory. In all the world, there is no country more tolerant of religious belief than Japan, where one may find a Christian, a Buddhist, a Shintoist, and a follower of Confucius in the same family, all having profound respect and consideration for each other's varying concepts of religion. Nevertheless, they are a ceremonious people, and most every shrine seems to inspire some simple ceremony which has religious significance. The great bronze Buddha of Kamakura is unquestionably the most inspiring shrine in all of Japan, and it has been standing as we see it here for over 7 centuries. Stranger, whosoever thou art, and whatsoever be thy creed, when thou enterest this sanctuary, thou treadest upon ground hallowed by the worship of ages. This is the temple of Buddha and the gate of the eternal, and should therefore be entered with reverence. So it was written centuries ago, and so it is today. The hands in the lap, palms upward and thumbs touching, are the Buddhistic attitude of firm faith. The dignity and perfect repose of this impressive figure reflect the higher life of the race that imagined it. And its countenance, calm like a deep, still water, teaches there is no higher happiness than rest. The ideal of eternal repose is fundamentally Oriental, And this image typifies that ideal as it does all else that is tender and calm in the soul of the East. The torii is one of Japan's most characteristic landmarks, its original purpose being to afford a resting place for birds in order that they might sing to the gods. Consequently, a torii is usually found before a temple of worship. The Shinto shrines of Nikko commemorate the memory of powerful leaders called shoguns, who for several centuries practically controlled the political destiny of Japan. Shintoism, the national religion, is a combination of ancestor and nature worship, in which the emperor is regarded as the supreme being on earth. Follow the genuine impulses of your heart is the essence of its ethical teaching. The native people go to the tombs of their ancestors, wherever they may be, and pray for inspiration and guidance in the solution of the gravest problems that beset them. And at Nikko, every problem is more or less symbolized by grotesque figures which adorn the temple walls. On the outer wall of one of the temples at Nikko is the original wood carving of that world-famous monkey trio, illustrating a golden rule for all humanity. Hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. Shinto and Buddhist priests frequently celebrate ceremonies in the same temple, being further proof that there is no religious conflict in Japan. The secret of this toleration may be due to the fact that fundamentally Shintoism deals with the past, Confucianism with the present, and Buddhism with the future. Consequently, one may embrace all three without friction. For ages, Japan and Mother Nature have been in perfect accord with each other, each giving the best to each, and out of it all has come a land as beautiful as the proverbial Eden itself, and a people who have found in nature and the simpler joys of life the chief source of their culture and their strength. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly conclude our visit to Japan in cherry blossom time. About 1,200 miles off the western coast of Africa lies the little island of St. Helena, a tiny dot of land in a great expanse of ocean, almost devoid of natural wealth, but world famous because of its tragic association with that so-called man of destiny, the late Napoleon Bonaparte, one-time emperor of France and dictator of Europe, a military genius who failed in his forceful conquest of the world and spent the last 6 years of his life as a prisoner of war upon this lonely isle. The Portuguese who discovered and named the island in 1502 found it uninhabited, but they formed no permanent settlement. Following the Portuguese came the Dutch and the English and the French, all bitter contenders for the possession of this little island, so strategically situated in the lane of important trade routes between Europe, South Africa, and India. For the past 2 centuries, however, St. Helena has been the undisturbed possession of Great Britain, and Jamestown, its only port, bears the distinction of having been named after one of England's kings. About 125 years ago, the British frigate Northumberland sailed into this harbor with the world's most illustrious prisoner of war, Napoleon Bonaparte. For 3 days, he was kept on board ship in the harbor, while the more curious inhabitants paddled out to get a close view of the defeated emperor, who was to dwell among them to the day of his death. The thought of him who once had all of Europe at his feet, the great Napoleon, standing alone on the deck of the Northumberland and gazing into these bleak hills, beyond which a prison home was being prepared for him, is one of the most tragic thoughts in the history of mankind. The dramatic story of Napoleon's exile has left an indelible mark upon this island, but the modern St. Helena boy does not appear to be very much concerned about it. In fact, the turbulent outside world and its famous men are nothing compared to the champion rail sliders of Ladder Hill, where 700 steps and 2 intriguing railings challenge the stoutest limbs and the toughest backs in Jamestown. When it was learned that exactly 699 steps lead to the British fort at the top of the hill, the desire for an even and lucky number so disturbed the natives that one ingenious lad dug away the soil at the bottom and created an additional step, thereby obtaining the lucky 700. The present population of the island does not exceed 4,000 inhabitants, and they represent a conglomeration of Portuguese, English, Dutch, Hindus, and Negroes, not a few of whom can trace their ancestry to a ship that stopped in passing sometime during the last 4 centuries. Thanks to the humble wants of its inhabitants, St. Helena is more or less self-supporting, although only a third of the island is suitable for farming. The principal crop is potatoes, and the cultivation of flax is the chief industry. But as a source of net revenue, nothing excels the postage stamp business, for a St. Helena stamp is invariably the pride of stamp collectors, as well as the premium stamp for postcards. It is said there are only 2 good reasons for stopping at St. Helena: to visit the home of Napoleon and to mail a postcard with a St. Helena stamp. And now we start out over the road that leads to Napoleon's home, the same road that the defeated emperor traversed as he was being taken to the final and smallest realm in the cycle that marked his turbulent career. Longwood, where Napoleon lived the last 6 years of his life with a small band of loyal followers who accepted voluntary exile in order to be with their emperor. Owing to a generous gesture on the part of the British government, Longwood is now French territory, and the flag of France waves here in solemn association with the spirit of Napoleon Bonaparte. While residing here, Napoleon was constantly guarded by British soldiers, and it caused him no end of grief. He complained bitterly, but in vain, to the governor of St. Helena, General Lowe, who seems to have been Napoleon's chief bone of contention during the whole period of his exile. After a few years, the prisoner's hope for freedom or escape was banished, and he finally became resigned to his fate. In his memoirs, he dictated, "No one but myself can be blamed for my fall. I have been my greatest enemy, the cause of my own disastrous fate. My aim was the United States of Europe, but fate intervened before I completed my task." And just prior to his death, he said, "There are only 2 powers in the world, the spirit and the sword. In the long run, the sword will always be conquered by the spirit." Napoleon died in 1821, after 6 years of exile, and he was buried in a beautiful little valley a short distance from Longwood, which also has become a French possession out of Great Britain's respect for the memory of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose name does not even appear upon his grave because of a difference of opinion that existed between the governor of St. Helena and Napoleon's loyal followers regarding the wording of the inscription. In 1840, when the body of Napoleon was taken from here to be reinterred in France, a most solemn procession marched with it to the sea. And as it passed along the main street in Jamestown, the choir in St. James's Church sang a farewell tribute to that man of destiny, whose memory is now the glorified heritage of St. Helena. And as we sail away in the path of the ship that bore the remains of the world's greatest military leader, who could not rule Europe by force of arms, we reflect upon the lesson he taught, and we wonder if the sun will ever set upon a United States of Europe welded together by peace instead of war. Quaint Quebec, one of the oldest and most historic cities on the continent of North America, is picturesquely situated upon a formidable plateau overlooking the St. Lawrence River, where the world's great railway and steamship lines now converge in the consummation of trade and traffic that originated here over 400 years ago, when the French explorer Jacques Cartier sailed up this river, which he christened as the St. Lawrence, and founded a fur trading station under the flag of France. It was Cartier who first called the country Canada, a name which he presumably derived from the Indian word Canatha, meaning a collection of huts or villages. A century later, under the guidance of the great French leaders Champlain and Frontenac, Quebec became the largest settlement in Canada, with the reputation of being the social, military, commercial, and ecclesiastical center of North America. At the height of its expansion, just prior to the American Revolution, the province of Quebec included almost half of Canada, as well as that part of the United States, now forming Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. In 1763, it was ceded to Great Britain, and it remains to this day as one of the most colorful and historic possessions of the British Empire. The city of Quebec, which is the only walled city in America, is divided into two sections known as the Upper Town and Lower Town. The latter, nestling along the shore just below the famous Chateau Frontenac, reminds us of some of the places that we have seen in rural France. Owing to devastating fires, many of the original landmarks have been destroyed, and reconstruction is gradually modernizing the building lines. But there is still to be seen enough quaintness of custom and design to associate Quebec with the atmosphere of an old world city. The Houses of Parliament remind us that Quebec is the seat of government for the province. English is generally spoken in the Dominion, but here the members of Parliament may address the House in French or English. St. Louis Gate, one of the several picturesque entrances to the city, is an outstanding example of early French architecture. In fact, French influence has been so definitely impressed upon the city that there is hardly a landmark which does not associate itself with old France. Incidentally, the language spoken by the habitants, as the French Canadians are called, resembles the French of the 17th century more closely than the French of modern Paris. The Champlain Monument is a fine tribute to him who founded the city in 1608 and called it Quebec, after the Indian name Quebec, meaning high rock. About 250 years ago, an English fleet failed in an attempt to capture Quebec from the French, and in commemoration of the event, this little church, which was being erected at the time, was called Our Lady of Victories, and it stands today as the oldest church in Canada. Leading from the lower to the upper town and connecting its two ends with a flight of stairs known as breakneck steps is under the Cape Street, one of the most historic little thoroughfares on the American continent. In the colorful and romantic days of yore, there passed along these little streets such famous characters as Cartier, Champlain, Frontenac, and Montcalm, founders and builders of New France on the North American continent. The marketplace in the lower town has also ignored the march of time, and business is conducted here very much as it was in the days when the coins exchanged bore the inscriptions of the French kings. Farming is still the chief occupation in the province of Quebec, and only a short distance from the city, the open country reveals a panorama of picturesque farms upon which a simple and kindly country folk eke out a livelihood. Almost every farmer is the owner of his farm, and as a result, a sense of freedom and independence seems to permeate the countryside. The municipal bake ovens were designed centuries ago by the early French settlers, and even today they are in practical use. By this method, several families are accommodated, and the necessity of overheating the houses during the hot summer months is avoided. Along the country roads, the simple life of the French farmer is ever apparent, and nothing is more colorful than the hook rug industry, carried on by the more thrifty housewives for the benefit of the tourist trade. Dog carts, such as were used to draw firewood by the early settlers, are still in use. One of the most popular scenic attractions in the province is Montmorency Falls, which in addition to its beauty, provides the city of Quebec with its electrical power. On the north bank of the St. Lawrence River, close to the city of Quebec, are the colorful and historic Plains of Abraham, where a decisive battle for the possession of Canada was fought between the English and the French. It was in September 1759 that the English General Wolfe sailed up the St. Lawrence River and by a clever ruse divided his army into two sections, one attracting Quebec from the river, while the other climbed the heights of Abraham and made a surprise attack. Although the French General Montcalm quickly rallied his forces, it was too late. The battle lasted about 10 minutes. Both Wolfe and Montcalm were killed. The French surrendered, and the great province of Quebec became an integral part of the British Empire. Commemorating that thrilling event stands the Wolfe and Montcalm Monument, symbolizing the friendship which now exists between the two great peoples of Canada. In the history of North America, there is probably no city that brings to the mind more thrilling memories than Quebec, and perhaps there is no institution in the New World today that still retains more of old world grandeur than the Chateau Frontenac, built upon an enchanted hill and comparable to a fairy castle with its towers and turrets mounting romantically to the sky. And this is the consummating impression that remains with us as we say farewell to quaint Quebec. About 400 miles off the east coast of Africa lies a group of colorful islands, the most important of which are Madagascar, the third largest island in the world, and Seychelles, upon which the original Garden of Eden is said to have been located. Madagascar is a French colony with a population of about 3.5 million people, and its chief port of call is Diego Suarez, in the beautiful harbor of which our good ship has just dropped anchor for a brief visit. Since 1896, Madagascar has been under the control of France, and among the prominent Frenchmen who have contributed to its history was Joffre, the great marshal of World War fame, who founded a naval station and military base here about 40 years ago. The Malagasy, or native people of Madagascar, were formerly ruled by their own kings under a tribal and primitive form of government, which apparently has not been entirely suppressed by the French. As a matter of fact, as recent as 1916, a fiendish plot to poison the entire French population was discovered, and as a result, hundreds of Malagasy were rigorously punished. Incidentally, that popular vehicle, the rickshaw, which seems to confine itself to the more remote parts of the world, is said to have been invented by a Connecticut missionary in China. And it is also said that a large percentage of the rickshaws used in the distant corners of the world are manufactured in Newark, New Jersey. For almost 100 years prior to the French regime, the Malagasy were ruled by female sovereigns, and as a result, the position of women is much higher here than is usually so in primitive countries. Madagascar's exports are far in excess of its imports, and most of its trade is with France and the French colonies, although no small amount of the capital invested in Madagascar's industries is British. Among the chief exports are rice, salt, tapioca, and coffee, and the bulk of these products pass through the port of Diego Suarez for shipment to France and the French colonies. Leaving Madagascar in the heat of an unrelenting sun, we begin our 600-mile journey northward to the Seychelles Islands, and while en route, we enjoy perfect relaxation on board ship, where the diversions of modern cruising provide an interesting contrast with the hardships that must have been experienced by the courageous old mariners who charted our route centuries ago. After 2 days of delightful sailing through the Indian Ocean, we arrive at Mahe, or Port Victoria, the principal island of the Seychelles group. Tradition associates Seychelles with the original Garden of Eden, but the recorded facts of history indicate that it was not visited by man until 1609. In that year, the crew of an English vessel seeking native trade explored the islands, but finding them entirely uninhabited, considered their visit in vain and sailed away. More than a century passed, and the peaceful little islands of Seychelles continue to exist, free of human life. The advent of man as a colonizer did not begin until about the middle of the 18th century, when Seychelles was formally annexed to France. It was first colonized by French Creoles and African Negroes, and later by East Indians and a few British. As a result of this, the population of Seychelles today is a very colorful mixture. Over a century ago, the islands of Seychelles were ceded to Great Britain, and Port Victoria is now a coaling station for the British Navy. But French influence still dominates the manners and customs of the people. The language in general use is a rude Creole patois, based on the French, with a large admixture of Indian, Bantu, and English words. The pure white population is less than 1,000. About 2/3 of the inhabitants are Roman Catholics. Fishing and agriculture constitute the most important occupations, but there is a primitive industry now in vogue that is becoming very popular, and it is called the sugar rum business, in which the juice from sugar cane is extracted by this ingenious method and is distilled as a potent liquor. Among the innumerable plants and trees that constitute Seychelles' picturesque foliage is a particular species of coconut tree, which produces a double coconut known as the coco de mer, and it is found in no other part of the world. The spiders of Seychelles are unusually colorful, and some of them are over 1 foot in length. In In spite of their cleverness in the construction of webs, spiders appear to have practically no intelligence. All their actions are instinctive. Even the construction of the beautiful wheel web is quite automatic, the severing of one strand of the spiral producing a corresponding deformity in the next. Nowhere in the world is there more beautiful scenery than that which may be seen along the shoreline of the Seychelles Islands, where a tropical sea provides a primitive people with the necessities of life. The natural beauty of the Seychelles Islands inspired the British General Gordon to refer to them as the Garden of Eden. And we are inclined to do likewise, for we know of no place on this earth that is more in keeping with what we would expect of that proverbial utopia. And it is here that we say farewell to the Garden of Eden. Picturesquely situated around the promontory of the Cape of Good Hope at the junction of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans lies one of the world's most historic ports of call, Cape Town, mother city of South Africa and southern gateway to what was once known as the Dark Continent. Table Mountain, which forms an impressive background for Cape Town, is often shrouded in a veil of mist, but on a clear day, a trip to its summit in a cable car provides a thrilling experience, as well as a beautiful panorama of the city and its famous coastline. The mountain peak toward which we now ascend has been a silent witness to the pageantry of exploration and strife that began in this part of the world 4.5 centuries ago, when the courageous Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama, seeking a new route to India, discovered what is now called the Cape of Good Hope. After the Portuguese came the English, the Dutch, and the French, all bitter contenders for this coveted part of the earth, which has finally become one of the strongest links in the long chain of possessions comprising the British Empire. Among the famous Englishmen who helped to make the Union of South Africa possible was Cecil John Rhodes, and the estate which he bequeathed to the Union as a residence for its prime ministers is the most colorful landmark in Cape Town. The house itself, constructed in the old Dutch style of architecture, indicates something of the wealth and grandeur which surrounded Cecil Rhodes, who journeyed from England to South Africa less than 70 years ago as a delicate youth seeking a change of climate to save himself from the premature death which his physicians predicted. He became interested in the mining of diamonds and eventually acquired great wealth, which he ambitiously devoted to the development of South Africa and the expansion of the British Empire. He died in 1902 at the age of 49 years, and the inspiring thought expressed in his dying words, "So much to do, so little done," poignantly summarizes the manner of man he was. Memorial, built into the side of Table Mountain and overlooking Cape Town, is a fitting tribute to him who devoted his life to the betterment of his country. Aside from his efforts in behalf of South Africa, the benevolences bestowed upon the English-speaking peoples of the world through the Rhodes Scholarships, which he inaugurated, would in itself entitle Cecil John Rhodes to a conspicuous place in the Hall of the Immortals, and we are in accord with South Africa in quoting this epitaph. The immense and brooding spirit still shall quicken and control. Living he was the land, and dead his soul shall be her soul. On the east coast of South Africa lies the city of Durban, with its harbor gracing the shores of the Indian Ocean and affording shelter to ships that ply the seven seas. In spite of Durban's phenomenal growth from a tiny native village to one of the premier cities of the Union, there is still to be seen here colorful natives who rather humorously personify primitive Africa. These Zulu gentlemen have an abiding faith in the physical. Their horns mean strength, their feathers speed, and they themselves mean business. Their profits are applied to the purchase of cows and wives, and when enough are required, they retire to their native kraals and live the rest of their lives as gentlemen of leisure. Unfailing vision before the rickshaw boy of Durban is the Valley of 1,000 Hills, a few miles from the city, where there is rest and peace. The native kraals in the Valley of 1,000 Hills illustrate a strange fact. For here, almost within the boundaries of a great modern city, Mother Africa clings to her ancient manners and customs, defying the innovations of time and the progress of civilization. And this curious fact does not only apply here, for we find it in practically all parts of the primitive world, where white invaders have tried to bring the miracles of transition into the lives of the native peoples. 3 generations illustrating that this march of time and the proximity of civilization mean little or nothing to them. While the burden of labor rests heavily upon the backs of their women, the retired rickshaw boys of Durban eat, drink, and dance to their heart's content. Several hundred miles beyond the Valley of 1,000 Hills, in Rhodesia, there is a phenomenon of nature which attracts tourists from all parts of the world, and it is invariably associated with the life of another famous pioneer, David Livingstone, missionary, explorer, and scientist, whose monument stands facing the Great Falls, which he discovered in 1855 and named in honor of Queen Victoria. David Livingstone was the first white man to gaze upon this magnificent spectacle, and he writes in his journal that the natives who accompanied him were overcome by fear. They believed the falls to be inhabited by evil spirits, and the clouds of spray that rose from the thundering cauldron probably inspired the native name, the Smoke That Thunders. This is India, cradle of mysticism, religion, and civilization, where for untold centuries the destiny of man has been determined by a religious system which classifies and regulates the birth, life, and death of almost a fourth of the world's population. Centuries ago, there lived here two wise and powerful emperors, Akbar the Great and his son Shah Jahan, and they probably achieved more for the development and perpetuation of Mughal architecture than any other rulers. Among the architectural wonders which they created are the so-called fort at Agra and the world-famous Taj Mahal. As we gaze upon these immortal landmarks, we may at first be inclined to think that they represent the glamour and romance of an era that no longer exists in India. But if we will divert our attention from the past and travel a few hours' journey to the native state of Baroda, we will find at the palace of His Highness, the Maharaja of Baroda, a modern display of oriental lavishness and splendor that we doubt could have been excelled by the extravagant nabobs of the past. For here, old India is still on parade. Three million subjects pay homage to the sovereign prince of this palace, who is rated among the wealthiest men on earth, his collection of jewels alone being valued at 30 million rupees. Doubt that more wealth has ever been concentrated in a parade like this one. Royal elephants wearing trappings studded with precious jewels. A small but well-equipped army of specially trained men. And sacred oxen with blankets of shimmering gold. Gold-plated caisson with cannon of silver and gold. Emblems of power and wealth which are said to be essential to a sovereign prince in India if he wishes to hold the respect and esteem of his people. Among the Maharaja's favorite animals are the royal elephants, a special breed, trained with utmost care and attention. Indian elephants occasionally grow to be as high as 15 feet, with a maximum weight of 9 to 10 tons. Most of them are caught wild and tamed, as they do not breed readily in captivity. Their period of gestation is about 20 months, and few of them live to be over 60 years of age. And here is Rip Kali, the Maharaja's famous trick elephant. The art of painting elephants with watercolors is an exalted profession, requiring most unusual imagination and skill. Rip Kali, for example, has the head of a panther painted around his eye in a manner which cleverly illustrates the smallness of an elephant's eye in proportion to his huge body. Kali's many accomplishments, the one that he seems to enjoy the most is smoking a typical Oriental pipe. And now we'll give Rip Kali a well-deserved rest and devote a brief moment to the Maharaja's monkeys. It is said that the attachment of the mother monkey to her young has no parallel in the whole animal kingdom, for only the death of the mother can possibly separate her from her baby. She brings into existence only one baby at a time, and like human babies, it is in a condition of utter helplessness for almost a year. And now that we have had a fleeting impression of the exotic lavishness that still exists in modern India, let us return again to the past and feast our imagination on the story of the immortal Taj Mahal, the so-called Temple of Love, which was built by the Emperor Shah Jahan as a memorial to his beautiful young wife, Mumtazi Mahal, whose body now lies beneath its marble dome. The story is told that after the death of the lovely Mumtazi Mahal, her husband was so overcome with grief that he was about to take his own life when the inspiration came to him to build upon the soil of India the most beautiful temple in the world, a Taj Mahal, to commemorate one of the most ardent and noble love affairs in the annals of romance. The building of this immortal temple was begun over 3 centuries ago, and it required 20 years to complete it at a cost of over £3 million. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the Taj Mahal is its atmosphere of newness. For almost 300 years it has stood as we see it here, yet it appears untouched by time, symbolizing, as it were, the eternal spirit of love which was its inspiration, the love of a man for a woman. And even now, under the magic spell of romance, we may hear the voice of the maiden who lies within its marble shroud, plaintively calling for the spirit of her loved one, Shah Jahan.
Before you agonize them in farewell, before you agonize them in farewell. Pale hands I loved beside the Shalimar.
Bombay, the second largest city in India and one of the most important seaports in the Eastern Hemisphere, is approached from the sea by way of an imposing arch that is known as the Gateway to India. The Taj Mahal Hotel is one of the most famous hostelries that dot the lanes of world travel and provide an international rendezvous for globetrotters. It looks to the sea for its patronage, and it depends so much on foreign trade that it has become somewhat foreign itself. As a matter of fact, at first sight, Bombay is apt to give one the impression of an Occidental metropolis, with all the trimmings and trappings of the 20th century. But this is only a foreign veneer, and behind it all is the real Bombay, with its teeming masses and customs that defy the innovations of Western civilization. The predominating religion of India is Hinduism, and its preservation depends upon the age-old system of caste, which determines at birth the way of life for its millions of followers. There are four main castes, ranging from the Brahmins at the top to the Sudras at the bottom. Beyond the exclusive circles of the castes are the outcasts, or untouchables, comprising over a fourth of the Hindu population, and it is they who do most of the manual work, including drudgery in its crudest form, the women of this class being the hardest workers. In this instance, the tempo of the toilers is determined by a drummer who claims he can estimate within a few hours the time required to erect a building. Contempt with which the members of the other castes, particularly the Brahmins, treat these unfortunate outcasts is carried to such extremes that in many places their presence or even their footprints are considered sufficient to defile a whole neighborhood. Without them, the other castes could not exist, yet they live in hopeless poverty and dare not aspire beyond the lowly boundaries of their unfortunate position. The byplay that goes on in a typical native market is extremely interesting if one is quick enough to discern it. Each caste patronizes its fellow members with an intricate system of formalities beyond the understanding of the Occidental mind, yet quite essential in the consummation of trade, whether it be elephants or oranges. For example, note the handshake under the towel, which may or may not guarantee a square deal. Apart from the mainland, but within the boundaries of Bombay, there is a little fishing village that was once a Portuguese possession, and it is one of the few communities in India where native life seems to be immune from the more troublesome restraints of caste. For here, the influence of the sea has helped to mold a more wholesome conception of religion and a less complicated system of living. The women of the village are chiefly engaged in cleaning and drying the fish that are caught by the men, a particular species of fish which is first salted and laid out in the sun, after which it is swept about until sufficiently dried. Then it is sent to market to be sold chiefly as an ingredient for Indian curry. This simple manner of living harmonizes with Hinduism in its most exalted form, since it teaches that man and woman, living and working equally together, make the perfect human being, to whose guardianship is entrusted the immortality of the race. They reason that outside of marriage there should be no sex, and not to marry is willfully to murder the possibility of life. Hindu girls are sometimes married at the age of 10 years, and it would be most unusual if the bonds of matrimony did not encircle them before their 16th year. To them, marriage is a solemn religious duty, and divorce is unknown, the underlying theory being that before God, the male and female form together the perfect human being. Therefore, neither can really worship apart from the other. It was this belief that once prompted Hindu widows to throw themselves upon the funeral pyres of their husbands. But thanks to British influence, this is no longer practiced within the law. The anticipation of a better life after death makes a Hindu funeral an occasion of spiritual joy rather than sorrow. As a matter of fact, the holidays in this village are marked by the number of funerals. On this occasion, the entire population has turned out to escort the body of a young bride to the burning ghats, where, according to their belief, the flames will consume her mortal remains, and dispatch her spirit to a better world. In extreme contrast to all this is the famous racetrack at Bombay, where life takes on a gayer mood and the lure of the turf brings all classes together on common ground. For here are assembled representatives of practically every color and creed in the world. The track itself is considered to be the most picturesque, if not the finest, in the Orient. And now they're off. Aside from the horse racing, it would still be worth a visit here to see the motley array of types in variegated costumes moving about the lawns, chatting in a babble of tongues, and vainly displaying wearing apparel from the smartest shops of the Orient, as well as the Occident. The colorful saris worn by the Indian women stand out in marked contrast to all the others. We doubt that there is a racetrack in the world that attracts a more interesting conglomeration of humanity than what is to be seen here, where old Mother India, in a rare but happy mood, momentarily at least, lets down the sinister bars of caste and gives us a more desirable impression to take with us as we most reluctantly say, farewell to Bombay, the gateway to India. Bangkok, the capital of Siam, is a grand terminus for the important railways of Indochina, and its railway station in the heart of the city forms an impressive background for the daily pageantry of Siam's one and only metropolis. Bangkok is said to cover more land area than any other city in the world except London. Its wide thoroughfares and paved streets are a fitting memorial to the foreign engineers who helped to reclaim the land from canals and marshes. But centuries before this, Bangkok had built its world-famous Buddhist temples, and they stand today as colorful symbols of an abiding faith. Buddhism, the national religion of Siam, was founded in India about 600 years before Christ by Gautama Buddha, a wealthy prince who relinquished all his earthly possessions in order to teach what he thought was a better way of life for himself and his fellow mortals. Buddha taught that all the miseries of life were caused by insatiable selfishness and greed. He said, "Until a man has overcome every sort of personal craving, his life is trouble and his end is sorrow. Lose yourself in the greater interests of life and desire nothing that can cause pain. The best of all and the end of all is a dreamless, eternal sleep." He reasoned that man must do right not because some God expected him to, but rather because there is a definite penalty to pay if he does wrong. His teachings were founded more upon reason than faith, and his chief aim was for knowledge rather than morality. Although Buddha desired no symbols or sacrifices or temples in which to commemorate his doctrines, his devoted followers have built thousands of Buddhist shrines throughout India, China, Japan, and Siam. And today, the simple creed that was born in the heart of a young prince over 25 centuries ago is said to have more followers than any other religion in the world. Every Siamese, including the king himself, must spend a period of his life in some one of the 10,000 monasteries of the land. In Bangkok alone, there are at least 500 temples dedicated to Buddhism. The chief entertainment of the Siamese people is found in national dancing, through which the drama of life is enacted and many a folklore is preserved. In this instance, the demon with the green mask is trying to steal a pearl or a silver ball from the daughter of Neptune, and each movement of her delicate hand symbolizes a thought in the story. The makeup of the women consists of powder plastered on the face until it resembles a smooth white mask, and this covering is meant to preclude all facial expression of the emotions. Hence, joy, sorrow, pleasure, anger, and fear are expressed by conventional signs. Dancers who are the most popular are those who can bend their fingers back as far as their wrists, an achievement that is the supreme desire of every Siamese dancer. In strange contrast to all the other graven images of Bangkok are two rather humorous-looking statues representing an ancient Siamese sculptor's impression of the first Dutchman to set foot on the soil of Siam. And now we come to the everyday life that is typical of Bangkok, a city that has been called the Venice of Asia because of its vast network of picturesque canals, upon which almost 1 million inhabitants ply their trades and live their lives. Except for a few railway lines, all travel in Siam is by water. The level of the land being so low and the soil so soft, the construction of roads would not be practical. In fact, for 3 months in the year, much of the land is underwater. Products of the soil consist of rice, sugarcane, coconuts, teak, and all kinds of fruits, which are loaded in boats and paddled up to Bangkok. The great river system of Siam is formed chiefly by the Manam River, with its numerous canals and tributaries spreading throughout the land and bringing life and sustenance to the people. In fact, this great river, with the plains which it alternately floods and drains, constitutes Siam itself, for the prosperity of the country depends largely upon its whims. The larger temples of Siam are called Wats, and perhaps the most famous of these is Wat Arun on the banks of the Menam River, one of the many picturesque sights that help to make a boat trip on the river an unforgettable experience. For here may be seen a panorama of life that is typical of serene Siam. It is here that we conclude our visit to the Royal Kingdom of Siam, where 12 million souls live their lives in partial seclusion from the outside world, apparently at peace with nature and content with the simpler things of life. Many a song has been inspired by the lure of springtime in the Rockies, for this is the season of the year when winter snows are melting and tiny mountain wildflowers are opening up their buds along the nooks and crannies of the colossal mountain peaks. We are in the Rocky Mountain National Park in the state of Colorado, where the untiring forces of nature have molded one of the world's grandest scenic spectacles, as well as a land of research for geologists and botanists, where here may be found the remains of fossils, plants, and mammals that lived and died long before the advent of man, all the beginning of recorded time. Here, too, the grandeur of nature inspires the soul of man and endows him with a sense of the infinite, comparable to nothing that he himself has been able to build. The Rocky Mountain National Park is one of many great areas set aside by the United States government for the preservation of primitive scenic beauty and wild animal and bird life. Until comparatively recent times, most of these regions were the private domains of Indians, hunters, and fur traders. But now, thanks to the advent of modern railways and ideal living conditions, they are conveniently accessible to the public at large. As we motor along a scenic highway en route to the Grand Teton National Park in the state of Wyoming, we learn that we are traveling over trails that were made famous in the days of the stagecoach. And as we arrive within sight of the Grand Teton Mountains, we behold a scene that takes us back to the frontier days of the wild and woolly West.
Oh, come along, boys, and listen to my tale. Tell you all my troubles on the old Chisholm Trail. Come a-tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay, yippee-yay. Come a-tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay. Oh, I started up the trail October 23rd. I started up the trail with the two you heard. Come a-tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay, yippee-yay. Come a-tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay. Oh, I went to the boss for to draw my roll. He had me figured out $9 in the hole. Come a-tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay, yippee-yay. Come a-tie-yi, yippee-yippee-yay.
But the illusion quickly vanishes, for it is not a real stagecoach, and the riders are just a group of so-called dudes from a dude ranch, reenacting a scene from the days when pioneer settlers went to church on horseback or in stagecoaches. Conveniently located throughout these vast mountain regions are a number of rustic settlements known as dude ranches, where visitors from all parts of the world emulate the colorful life of the proverbial Wild West. Incidentally, dudes is the term applied to visitors by the rugged sons of the West, who operate the picturesque ranch properties. And here is one of the reasons for the popularity of dude ranch vacations. Overshadowing all this are the peaks of the Grand Teton Mountains, forming a picturesque background for a scene that is typical of the Old West, when real cowboys rode the plains and life was not just a holiday. The horses that are let out on the plains at night are rounded up in the morning and driven into corrals, chiefly for the entertainment of the dudes, who have the privilege of choosing from a grand assortment a suitable horse to ride. But here is a horse that no dude chooses to ride.
Oh, Buffalo gal, when you coming out tonight, coming out tonight, coming out tonight. Oh, Buffalo gal, when you coming out tonight, dance by the light of the moon. It's coming out tonight, coming out tonight, coming out tonight. It's coming out tonight, dance by the light of the moon.
And now for a ride over magnificent mountain trails, where the grandeur of nature and the sheer joy of living puts a song in your heart, the sentiment of which you wish the troubled outside world could appreciate and understand.
Where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Oh, our ways, where the deer are, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.
And so the day ends on the range, and it is here that we most reluctantly conclude our impressions of Rocky Mountain grandeur. Lima is the surprise city of South America, for most visitors who gaze upon it for the first time do not expect to find a modern and up-to-date metropolis such as we see here. Lima is also the capital of a vast country richly endowed with natural resources, including sugar, cotton, petroleum, copper, silver, and numerous commodities of worldwide importance. And we are impressed by its beautiful buildings and plazas, modern hotels, the very finest cinema theaters, and all the 20th century innovations found in the cosmopolitan cities of the world. Incidentally, Lima is one of the few places in the world where a motion picture exhibitor thinks enough of a short subject to advertise it with his features, and we are quite thrilled at seeing one of our travel talks sharing honors on the same marquee with William Powell and Myrna Loy. The Plaza de Armas is of historical significance, for it was here in 1535 that Francisco Pizarro, the conqueror of Peru, founded the city of Lima, and his body now lies in a glass casket in the picturesque cathedral which dominates the plaza. The Country Club of Lima is a rendezvous for the socially elite of the city, providing for its members golf, polo, entertainments, and various other forms of diversion. In the background of a picturesque lagoon is La Cabana, one of Lima's most popular clubs, as well as a noted meeting place for world travelers. Spanish dancing has influenced native Indian dancing considerably. But at Chiclín, the Peruvian Indians stage a dance which we are told was performed by their ancestors before they were conquered by the Spaniards. Picturesque scenes of rural Peru are witnessed en route to Huancayo, where the native Indians travel for miles to bring their goods to the famous Sunday market, representing one of the most colorful gatherings to be seen in all of Peru. And at the end of the day, the Indians pack up their purchases and unsold merchandise and retire to their rural haunts in the hills and the valleys, where the old bridges of their forefathers provide a thrilling adventure for the courageous passengers in the overloaded vehicles, which now transport some of the wealthier Indians to and from the market. While en route to Lake Titicaca, we stop off at Arequipa, formerly an Indian village, but incorporated as a Spanish city in 1540. The origin of the word Arequipa is supposed to have come from the Indian word Arequipe, which means, yes, stay here. And the place to stay is at Quinta Bates, where one may have the pleasure of meeting the best-known woman in Peru, Tia Bates, as she is called by the 5,000 Indian children who acknowledge her as their godmother. 40 years ago, this remarkable woman left her home in the United States and journeyed with her parents to South America, finally settling in Peru, where she has resided ever since. Braving the hardships of earlier frontier days, Tia Bates learned the language, manners, and customs of the native Indians and devoted precious years of her life to teaching and helping them to improve their way of living. Her name has become an institution in Peru, and her establishment is a mecca for world travelers. But her chief interest lies with the native Indian girls, to whom she has brought a culture and refinement that will always be a reflection of herself and a credit to her memory. And now we continue our journey to Lake Titicaca, over a railway route that abounds in beautiful settings of mountains and lakes, forming a fitting prelude to the glorious scenes which await us at our destination. We arrive at Lake Titicaca, where the golden glow of dawn enshrines a setting beyond the power of words to describe. Boats used by the native Indians are called balsas, and they are the same models that were used by the ancient inhabitants of Peru and Bolivia, long before the coming of the Spanish conquerors. They are made of reeds which grow on the banks of the lake, and are not unlike the reed boats that were used by the early Egyptians in their navigation of the Nile. Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable body of water in the world, and it has regular steamship service between Bolivia and Peru. We have seen many sunrises and sunsets in all parts of the world, but never have we seen such manifestations of vivid color as that which attend the great orb of day as it rises and sets on Lake Titicaca. After gazing upon such divine grandeur, it is easy to understand why the early inhabitants on the shores of Lake Titicaca were sun worshippers. And this is the thought that remains with us as we reluctantly conclude our glimpses of Peru. In the western part of the United States, there is a vast area of uncultivated land, embracing in particular the states of Arizona, Wyoming, Utah, and South Dakota, which was originally referred to by the native Indians and early white pioneers as the Badlands of the West. But today, this very colorful expanse of scenic grandeur is being converted into gigantic national parks, abounding in natural wonders which attract visitors from all parts of the world. And the Grand Canyon of the Colorado is generally conceded to be the most spectacular of all the so-called Badlands. Perhaps there is no place on the earth that better illustrates the story of geological evolution than Bryce Canyon in the state of Utah, where the relentless drip of raindrops, aided by ice and wind, carrying away a grain of sand at a time, has carved and is continuing to carve these fantastic monuments. The native Indians made it a rule never to be caught in the canyons after dark, for they believed them to be haunted by the demons of the night. But to modern men, this divine spectacle is a revelation of the colossal forces of Mother Nature, who for her own purpose broods and rears and elevates, and also for her own purpose levels, sweeps away, and destroys. Natural bridges, spires, minarets, arches, gables, all the achievements of architecture were formed here long before the coming of mankind. A celestial city, as it were, which has been reflecting the flush of morning and the glow of evening since time began. And now we come to the Badlands of South Dakota and Wyoming, where Wild Bill Hickok, Calamity Jane, Deadwood Dick, and other notorious characters of the frontier days dashed boldly across the pages of American history. Protected by the remoteness as well as the natural fortresses of this isolated land, they lived, gambled, or preserved peace, and died by hanging or gunfire, according to their destiny. Needless to say, it was the discovery of gold and the greed for gold that inspired most of the thrilling tales we hear about this gold-colored land. And it seems fitting that the most conspicuous landmark in this region should be known as the Devil's Tower. This remarkable mass of volcanic rock is about 1,700 feet in diameter at the base, and it rises to a height of over 1,000 feet, forming one of the most astounding natural rock formations in the world. Long before the coming of the white pioneers, the native Indians were awe-stricken by this remarkable oddity, and among other things, they believed that an evil spirit beat a gigantic drum upon its summit during thunderstorms. Within view of this conspicuous landmark, which can be seen on a clear day at a distance of almost 100 miles, there is a vast tract of land set apart for a colorful tribe of Sioux Indians who entertain us with the so-called sun dance, inaugurated by their forefathers in this very region hundreds of years ago. Although this dance is now associated directly with the sun, its original significance is believed to have been based upon vengeance. For example, if a friend or a close relative of an Indian was killed by a rival tribe, he confirmed his vow of vengeance by dancing from sunrise to sunset, blowing a whistle as he danced by way of attracting to him the spirit of the deceased, which he believed would aid him in achieving a just revenge. Today, however, this monotonous dance seems to be confined to a form of sun worship, in which the dancers only change their position to follow the course of the sun. More colorful and more varied in form than the sun dance is the war dance, which in former times was performed by the Sioux Indians before a war or to celebrate a victory. Incidentally, it has been generally assumed that the population of the North American Indian has been diminishing so rapidly that it will soon pass from the face of the earth. But this is a commonly accepted error, for since the census of 1865, there has been a substantial increase in the native Indian population. And today it is estimated that there are almost 400,000 Indians now living in the United States, or a little less than half of the original population. And all this transpires within the shadow of the Black Hills of South Dakota, one of the oldest regions in the world. As a matter of fact, geologists claim that the granite formations in these hills have existed for as long as 40 millions of years. And it seems fitting, therefore, that this part of the United States should have been chosen as a suitable place in which to carve one of the most impressive sculptures ever carved upon the face of the earth. Traveling around the world, we have seen colossal records in stone, commemorating the memory of peoples who lived in the dawn of history. But on Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills of South Dakota, we behold a monument that greatly minimizes the importance of all the others. And as we approach this wonder of modern sculpture, we recall that the Mount Rushmore National Commission was created by an act of Congress in 1929. Here in the hard granite is being carved the faces of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt, 4 great Americans who represent distinct developments in the birth, growth, and progress of the United States. These gigantic faces are 60 feet from the top of the forehead to the chin, and the figures are on the scale of men 465 feet in height. Washington and Jefferson adjoin each other, and to the right of them is the face of Lincoln, now in the process of formation. Unfortunately, at the time of our visit, the face of Theodore Roosevelt was still an idea in the brain of the sculptor. And as a matter of fact, the entire memorial had hardly begun to show the colossal proportions and thrilling effects that await its final completion. The idea of creating this great sculpture is credited to Doane Robinson, a former historian of South Dakota, and the execution of the idea is in the hands of Gutzon Borglum, one of the world's foremost sculptors. Incidentally, when Mr. Borglum was told that the granite in which he was carving his masterpiece would erode at the rate of 1 inch every 100,000 years, he patriotically added another 12 inches to the nose of Washington, thereby perpetuating that famous nose for an additional 1,200,000 years. In the centuries to come, many changes will affect the evolution of mankind, and the maps of the earth will be subjected to many variations. But here upon Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills of South Dakota will remain a monument, defying the ramifications of time, commemorating for 1,000,000 years or more the memory of 4 great Americans who helped to establish one of the greatest republics ever inaugurated in the history of mankind. Prominently situated on the Bay of Fundy in the province of New Brunswick lies the quaint old city of St. John, one of the eastern gateways to Canada. Its history dramatically associates itself with the American Revolution, for it was here that many English loyalists settled after having been exiled from their homes in the newly created United States of America. Just a few years before George Washington was inaugurated as president, about 3,000 of these exiles landed here and founded the town of St. John, while thousands of others settled in the valley of the St. John River, so that it may be concluded that a large number of the inhabitants of New Brunswick today are descended from the English loyalists who came from that land that is now known as the United States of America. Spacious parks and commons in the heart of the city, along with invigorating sea breezes, contribute largely to St. John's reputation as one of the healthiest cities in Canada. In almost every city or town in North America, there is a schoolhouse which claims among its pupils at least one who distinguished himself through achievements of worldwide significance, and this institution is no exception, for it boasts of the fact that it was here that Louis B. Mayer went to school. The same Louis B. Mayer who walked down these steps and out into the world as a youngster in modest circumstances, and ultimately became, as he is today, a guiding spirit of the motion picture industry, as well as the mayor part of the world-famous Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Company. The Bay of Fundy at the mouth of the St. John River has been heralded in song and story as a haven for those who go down to the sea in ships. It is also noted for a natural phenomenon which has become one of the main attractions of New Brunswick. At the point where the tide meets the river, a condition is created which is known as the reversing falls. In other words, when the tide is coming in from the Bay of Fundy, it forces the flow of the river backward, and the condition is naturally reversed when the tide flows out. And now let us cruise up the picturesque river, where one may see an occasional tug towing its load of lumber to the mills, or a fisherman who uses an aquaplane to transport him to the scene of his pleasure. The St. John River abounds in fish of various species, but salmon is the choice catch, and here is a somewhat modest sample, according to the anglers of New Brunswick. Nowhere in our extensive traveling have we seen a more interesting bridge than the one which gracefully spans the St. John River near Fredericton. It is called the Snow Bridge and is said to be the largest of its kind in the world. About 85 miles up the St. John River is the capital city of Fredericton, seat of government for the province of New Brunswick, also founded by the English Loyalists at the close of the American Revolution. Christ Church Cathedral is said to be the first cathedral foundation on English soil since the Norman Conquest. Fredericton itself is a quaint, quiet, and peaceful little town, fittingly designed for the purpose it serves. The popular resort of Bathurst is noted for its ideal bathing conditions, but unfortunately at the time of our visit, the summer season was over, and autumn skies were already casting their ominous shadows over Bathurst Lodge, giving the characteristic touch of sadness to the closing days of a popular summer resort. The Union Jack, which is in conspicuous evidence throughout the province, reminds us of the intense loyalty which New Brunswick still holds for its mother country. And a typical panorama of the countryside also reminds us that nature helps to keep this sentiment alive, with rolling hills and landscapes resembling rural England itself. Farming is one of the country's major industries, and in harvest time, nothing is more colorful than the vast fields of golden wheat scattered in picturesque profusion along the banks of New Brunswick's many rivers. In colorful contrast to the wheat fields are the potato farms, upon which thousands of bushels of choice potatoes are grown annually. The lumber industry is foremost among the industries of New Brunswick, and in the flood season, nothing is more spectacular than the sight of the swift-flowing rivers jammed full of rolling logs en route to the numerous lumber mills, where they are stored in ponds or sluices until utilized. In a placid cove on the Bay of Fundy lies the little town of Black's Harbor, headquarters of the Canadian sardine industry, as well as the largest sardine factory in the world. Practically the whole population of Black's Harbor is engaged in the sardine business, the women preparing the fish in the factory for shipment to the markets of the world, while the men catch them in large weirs, almost within sight of the factory. Sardines are vegetarians, and they naturally migrate into coves like Black's Harbor, where choice vegetation floats on the surface of the water. Then, too, the tides here rise as high as 30 feet, bringing with them millions of sardines, which are caught in the weirs as the tides recede. Then the fishermen go to work, literally shoveling the swimming silver into their boats. We are told there is no such fish as a sardine, the word itself being coined from Sardinia, and what is generally referred to as a sardine is in reality a small species of herring. All in the passing of a working day, these sardines are caught, salted, cleaned, cooked, packed, and shipped to all parts of the world. Verily, Mother Nature has been kind to New Brunswick, for in addition to an abundant measure of wheat, potatoes, lumber, and fish, she has also endowed this province with picturesque landscapes and a delightful climate, all of which tempts us to linger a while. But the approach of our seaplane reminds us that it is time for us to depart. So with a final view of Lake Utopia, we conclude our glimpses of New Brunswick and fly away to other ports of call. Gracing the banks of the historic Danube River lies the beautiful city of Budapest, which is in reality a combination of what was formerly two cities, Buda on the left bank of the Danube and Pest on the right, as we see it here. During the past 50 years, the population of Budapest has increased from 300,000 to over 1 million inhabitants. And being the capital city, it supports one of the largest houses of parliament in the world. A fitting home for the government of a nation that has lived through over 1,000 years of interesting history. And this reminds us that Hungary was formerly an important part of the great Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was disintegrated as a result of the last war, all of which is uniquely illustrated by a floral map in Liberty Square. The section shown with light flowers represents Hungary as it is today, and the boundaries designated by red flowers shows it as it was before the Treaty of Trianon. Naturally, the people of Hungary are determined to have this treaty revised, and until it happens, they claim a flag will hang at half-mast beside the floral map in Liberty Square. One of the most colorful buildings in Budapest is the so-called storehouse of the Hungarian Archives. It contains many priceless manuscripts and state documents, as well as precious examples of Hungarian art and craftsmanship. The shopping districts of Budapest are on a par with the best of those in modern cities, and one may purchase here the choice products of Hungary as well as the world at large. Budapest is one of the few large cities in the world that has not yet suffered from the extreme inconveniences of traffic congestion, and this may account somewhat for the broad and dramatic gestures of the traffic policeman. The year of 1849 was a most important one in the history of Budapest, for it was the year in which the famous Chain Bridge was completed, the first of its kind in Europe, and even today it is one of the city's chief attractions. At first it was thought insufficient clearance had been allowed for the larger steamships, but an ingenious method was discovered whereby smokestacks lean backwards in humble obeisance as they pass under the bridge. Impressively situated upon a hill in the Buddhist section of the city stands the Royal Palace, built in the latter part of the 18th century during the reign of Queen Maria Theresa. No history of Budapest or Hungary would be complete without including a few facts about St. Stephen, to the memory of whom several memorials are consecrated. About 1,000 years ago, St. Stephen, who is reported to be the real founder of the Hungarian nation, was crowned by the Pope as the first Christian king of Hungary. And by this act, a country formerly under Eastern influence was brought into the fold of Western civilization. According to tradition, this church was founded by St. Stephen, and it is known today as the Coronation Church. On an artificial island stands the Museum of Agriculture, considered to be one of the best constructed buildings in Europe. Budapest is noted for its colorful outdoor restaurants, where the spirit of gaiety and hospitality mingles with the spirit of music. No composer has done more toward glorifying Hungarian gypsy music than Franz Liszt, one of Hungary's greatest contributions to the world's Hall of Fame. And his immortal music is like a daily prayer to the orchestras of Budapest. On Margaret's Island, there is a thermal grotto in which it is said a holy man once lived and wrought miraculous cures by bathing people in the thermal springs that are found all over Budapest. As a result, the fame of the springs spread broad, and consequently, Budapest has become one of the most popular watering places in the world. This is one of the largest outdoor swimming pools on Margaret's Island, and although it is kept intact by artificial walls, its water supply comes from natural springs under the floor of the pool. It is estimated that 5 million gallons of water flow from Budapest's numerous and variegated springs every day. There are about 80 outdoor swimming pools, and one of the most popular of them is known as St. Gellert's, where artificial waves are created by a mechanical device at the far end of the pool. And now, let there be waves. This doesn't seem to be the proper time to say farewell to beautiful Budapest. But that's just one of the hardships of world traveling for those who must always give way to the limitations of time. So now, with a final glimpse of that famous river which inspired one of the world's immortal waltzes, we will conclude our impressions of beautiful Budapest and waltz away to other ports of call. Just off the coast of Sweden, on the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea, lies the ancient Viking town of Visby, meaning place of sacrifice, where the monuments of ages long gone by stand in eloquent testimony to a glorious past. Owing to its position in the middle of the great trade route between Eastern and Western Europe, Visby was formerly one of the most famous commercial ports in the Western Hemisphere. And during the Middle Ages, when it reached the height of its glory, it was the key city of the powerful Hanseatic League. But geographical discoveries and political transitions changed the course of trade routes and ultimately caused the decline of Visby, so that today it is reduced to an idyllic city of ruins and roses, providing inspiration to artists of every description and attracting visitors from all parts of the world. It is not known when the first city of Visby was built, but archaeologists claim there was a town on the present site more than 2,000 years before Christ. And only recently, men digging near the ruins of St. Catherine's Church found large blocks of stone, under which were the ruins of another town, evidently of the Stone Age. During those centuries when Visby minted its own coin and issued its own maritime laws, a huge wall was built around the city, and even today it is in a remarkable state of preservation, illustrating the great efforts that were made to protect the city from the invasion of powerful enemies in the neighboring states of the Baltic. The walls surrounding the town extend over a much greater area than the town itself, proving that in ancient times, Visby was much larger than it is now, with its present population of about 11,000 inhabitants. But the commercial prestige, which was part of its past, is compensated for today by its importance as one of Sweden's most popular pleasure resorts. Once a center of power and activity, now a haven of peace and rest. Such is the thought we take with us as we sail away from Visby. On the mainland of Sweden stands the historic old castle of Gripsholm, which derived its name from its first known tenant, a certain Mr. Grip, Lord High Chancellor of Sweden, who died in 1386. Here, Gustavus Adolphus, one of Sweden's most illustrious rulers, planned and organized the ideas that were destined to bring an almost unparalleled prosperity to his country. Among the many things of interest in and around Gripsholm Castle are two huge and richly decorated brass cannon, captured from the Russians in the year of 1581. Russian inscriptions on the guns refer to them as wolves, but the Swedes have christened them as the Hog and the Sow. They are now furnished with mountings faithfully copied from those in vogue during the 16th century. A more interesting feature of Gripsholm are the native people in their colorful costumes, lending atmosphere that is reminiscent of old Sweden itself. They are a kindly and hospitable folk, always pleased to welcome a stranger with a smile and a handshake. And we feel that they are justified in being proud of their colorful costumes, which, like the inscriptions on their rune stones, date back into the distant past. And now let us join in a good old-fashioned folk dance, which is characteristic of the simpler joys of Sweden. It is natural for a people with strong national characteristics to keep alive the manners and customs of its ancestors. And ever since the days of the Vikings, colorful pageantry in which historic events are reenacted has been one of the popular diversions of the Swedish people. Just outside of Stockholm, there is an interesting community known as Skansens, wherein has been perpetuated the architecture, manners, and customs of rural and ancient Sweden. Here, too, during the summer season, one may witness typical performances of folk music and folk dancing. For thousands of years, the same race has been known to inhabit Sweden, intermingling very little with other races. In fact, we have represented here the descendants of the valiant Vikings, one of the oldest and most powerful branches of the white race. The Swedes are an outdoor-loving people, and they claim credit for being the first to introduce many of the outdoor games and sports, which are in general practice today, such as hammer throwing, wrestling, boxing, football, and baseball, all of which, they tell us, originated in one form or another among their ancestors, the ancient Vikings. Somehow, this style of dancing is one of the pleasures of yesterday that we envy, for it reveals a spirit of genuine good feeling and wholesome fun, which is seldom portrayed in modern dancing. And so it goes with rural Sweden, where the past and present walk hand in hand, and all seems to be well with the world.